Welcome to The Explainer, where we examine the systems shaping our world. Okay, so sports are supposed to be about sorting talent fairly, right? But what if the biggest fight in sports today isn't really about the athletes, but about who gets to define the categories in the first place? Let's get into who actually holds the power to make the rules. We're going to be diving into the ideas in Katie Barnes's new book, Fair Play. Sports are built on this ideal of fair competition. But this incredibly intense debate over gender has turned fields and pools and arenas into these cultural battlegrounds. And it's forcing all of us to ask, what does fair even mean anymore? To really get why this is all so charged, you have to start right here. Barnes writes about how basketball was a personal sanctuary, a place to belong and just be yourself. For so many athletes, this is the heart of it. It is so much more than just a game, it's a huge piece of their identity. And that deeply personal connection people have with sports, it's now at the absolute center of a national flashpoint. And this isn't some quiet academic debate. It's being argued in state houses, it's all over the news, and it's probably even being talked about at your doctor's office. It's everywhere. A lawmaker actually asked the author this very question. And wow, it just gets right to the heart of all the anxiety, doesn't it? It's a question that's built on this deep-seated fear that the categories we've always known are now somehow under threat. And that forces us to look at, how were those categories built in the first place? So to really understand the conflict we see today, we've got to rewind a little bit. We need to look at why the whole category of women's sports was even created. Its origin story is absolutely key to everything that's happening now. Okay, so the foundation for modern women's sports in the U.S. is a law called Title IX. And what's really fascinating is that this law, all 37 words of it, it wasn't even about sports at the beginning. It was this big, broad civil rights law about access to education. Before this law, the opportunities for girls and women were just incredibly rare. So the whole system of separating sports by sex wasn't designed to exclude anyone. It was actually a practical solution built to ensure inclusion, to give women who were starting decades behind on funding and everything else a real, meaningful chance to compete. And here's the catch. The moment you create a protected space, you immediately create a brand new problem for every single school and sports organization. They now have to decide who qualifies to be in that space. They have to draw a line somewhere. So ever since that line had to be drawn, sports organizations have been on this long, really complicated quest to find one simple, scientific rule to define who belongs on which side. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Look at how unstable that scientific line has been over the years. It started with visual inspections, literally nude parades, in the early Olympics. Then it shifted to chromosome tests in the 60s. And now the focus is on measuring testosterone levels. The so-called science has just never been settled. And let's be real. The focus on testosterone isn't purely about biology. As Barnes points out, it gets all the attention because it's so deeply understood in our culture as the male hormone. This whole search for a rule isn't just about physiology. It's profoundly shaped by our social ideas about masculinity and femininity.
This brings us to a really powerful metaphor that I think helps clarify why this whole conflict feels so stuck and why just yelling, "Look at the science," isn't solving anything.
Okay, think of it like this. The map is our scientific and social understanding of the world. The old map of sex was super simple, right? Just two countries, male and female. But today's map is way more detailed, way more complex. Now, the gate represents the rules of sports. That gate was built decades ago to fit that old, simple map. The thing is, the gate is still standing right where it was, but the terrain it was supposed to divide has completely changed underneath it. So here's the crucial point. When these big institutions are faced with this new, more complex map, their response has often been to just ignore the map and build the gate higher. Instead of actually rethinking the categories themselves, the instinct is just to make the old rules even stricter. And that right there reveals what's really going on. This conflict isn't just about fairness between a few athletes. It's about a much deeper, often invisible question. Who actually holds the power to draw the map and build the gate in the first place? And this table just lays it all out perfectly. You've got these clashing forces. Sports institutions, their main goal is legitimacy and order. They want things to run smoothly. Politicians and the media, well, they often profit from the controversy. And then, caught in the middle, you have the athletes. All they want is access, dignity, and a fair chance to play the sport they love. So all those competing incentives lead to two fundamentally different blueprints for the rules. On one side, you have a framework that wants to preserve the category based on biological markers, like testosterone. And on the other, a framework that prioritizes inclusion based on a person's consistent gender identity. We're not talking about small tweaks here. These are entirely different ways of drawing the map.
And this right here is the core crisis in perception. Our attention, our public debate, it gets totally locked onto individual athletes, their bodies, their performance, their right to be on a team, but focusing on that often completely hides the real system that's at play, the immense institutional power to classify human beings and decide who is legitimate and who isn't.
So the question we're left with isn't really about who's right or who's wrong in any single race or game. It's about looking past the athletes past the gate and looking at the map makers themselves. And we have to ask, who truly holds the power to define what's fair?